Hello everybody, I'm Sam Bicarino and welcome to the first episode in a new series, Decoding the Pros. In this series we'll be talking to WSL players past and present to decode their playing career. We'll chat about their life off the pitch as well and learn a bit more about them as a person. I'm delighted to say that we have a brilliant guest on for episode 1. We have someone that's played over 250 competitive club appearances, including 112 for her current club Leicester and 57 caps for Scotland, scoring 4 goals in the process. It is the wonderful Sophie Howard. Sophie, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I'm delighted to be joining you, actually.
Oh, thank you very much for coming on. Because, obviously listeners won't know this, but we're currently recording on the 24th of February, so it's the day before you're about to play Netherlands at Hampden Park, aren't you? Looking forward to that, I hope.
Yeah, very much so. Obviously, on camp, as you've mentioned, had our first game Friday. I think it's been an interesting one because it's kind of a fresh start for us with new manager, new coaching staff, new players involved. But yeah, as you said, we're going into our next game against the Netherlands tomorrow back at Hampden Park.
Yeah, so I'm very appreciative that you're giving up some of your time at a busy time to speak to us. Today we're going to take a look at sort of your development and your early career, then talk a bit about your time playing in England, especially at Leicester, and your playing style. Obviously, we'll touch on your international career as well. We'll also talk about how the women's game has changed and is changing, continuing to change, and we'll take some listener questions as well throughout. So, like I said, we'll start off with your sort of development and your early career. Obviously, although you represent Scotland, you weren't born in Scotland, you grew up in Germany. How was that, and how did you first get into football?
As you mentioned, I was born in Germany and I grew up in Germany and spent, I think, my first 18 years of my life in Germany. I've got an English dad and a Scottish mum, and that's how it all came about, but they moved to Germany before I was born. The question, how was it growing up in Germany and how did I start playing football? I started playing football because when I was younger, I idolised everything my older brother did. He's 3 years older, and he's also the guy that I do my own podcast with. So I still idolise him today. But he played football, so I just wanted to follow in his footsteps. And that's, I guess, how I started playing. I was 5 years old all those years back. How was it? I didn't know any different. For me, growing up in Germany was the only thing I knew. It's not like I moved abroad when I was young. That was just my childhood. I very much loved it. I grew up with, I'm one of 4, so 3 siblings, and it was absolute carnage, but I loved every minute of it.
You often hear about people when they've got brothers and sisters, especially older ones, just not just following their footsteps, but you kind of want to beat them as well.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
They're obviously bigger and stronger to start with because they're older. Be good enough to beat him, I guess, from an early age.
Yeah, I think we're a very competitive family. I think we can't have games and I guess competitions just for fun. It often, back in the day, used to end in arguments. I say back in the day, it still does, unfortunately. But all 4 of us are very competitive, and whatever we do, I always want to beat not only my older brother, but all of them.
Sounds like a good sibling rivalry. Obviously, you started playing at Hoffenheim, was sort of your first professional team. You took a few years away from the game in Germany because you went to university in America. Obviously, studied as well while you're out there, as well as playing. Came back to Germany, back to Hoffenheim in 2015. Spent another 3 seasons there. How was that? Because obviously, you've got a bit of experience then playing in, well, it was Bundesliga 2 at the time when you were first there, and then playing in sort of the main Bundesliga by the time you came back. How much had sort of football changed? How much had Hoffenheim changed in those 8 years?
I think when I first joined Hoffenheim, I was still a kid. I was only 15 years old. How my mum and dad, but especially my mum, let me move away from home when I was only 15, I do not know. But I'm very grateful that they did. And all those years later, when I actually returned to Hoffenheim, but especially when I left Hoffenheim, I left as a young woman, I think. So my spell or my years in Hoffenheim actually were the years where I grew up, and the people there took me under their wing, and they were kind of my football family that not only allowed me to grow up, but made me grow up very quickly. In terms of football, as you mentioned, it was my first kind of professional station as such. When I was looking to take that next step, it was because, as I mentioned, I was 15 years old, and that was a time, at that point, I was still playing with boys, and I had to make the switch to women's football or girls' football. And I was looking for a setup where I could have very high level football and coaches, but also, I guess, an institution that focused on academics as well, and that was very important to my parents. And again, I'm very grateful for that because it allowed me to build, I guess, a career off the pitch that I can fall back onto. So that's why, in the end, we decided to join Hoffenheim and had a few trials, and it all worked out. Fortunately, as you mentioned, when I joined, we were still my first year in the so-called Regionalliga, which is third tier, and then went up to second Bundesliga. Um, and I finished school there as well. Obviously I moved away from home. I lived with a host family, and I finished school, and then it was time for the next step. So it already there was a pattern that developed that every time I completed something, there was a next challenge and a next step that I wanted to take to develop further, whether that's as a football player, but mainly also as a person, which is something that is very important to me. And that's when the opportunity came up for me to move to the US and play college football and have that experience. And again, build my academic career alongside playing very high level football. So I moved to the University of Central Florida and I graduated in 3 years, and then returned 3 years later back to my then what felt like a home because I'd lived and grew up in Hoffenheim for so many years. I lived there and I finished school there, as I said. So I always stayed in touch with those people, and especially obviously the club. And therefore I returned to Hoffenheim, and I loved going back to what I knew as home.
Yeah, I bet you get that sort of home comforts after a few years away playing in America. Was the club quite different by the time you went back? Because obviously they'd moved up a league into the top tier of German football, into Frauen Bundesliga. Sort of obviously the quality of football will have stepped up, but things like were the facilities different? Were sort of their attitudes to match days, recovery, things like that, had much changed?
I think the facilities were still the same, but we had very high level facilities for, I guess, where the game was at in Germany at that time. We had facilities only for us as a women's department within the club, which was very uncommon. And I think when I returned to Hoffenheim, I did experience and feel that first step of moving towards the professional game, in a sense of not only it being a job, but also the investment and the facilities that improved, and the whole overall commitment of the club to the women's setup. Um, as you mentioned, not only had we gotten promoted to the first Bundesliga and now are competing in, as a very young and small club actually, are competing in that at the highest level in the highest league. But you could definitely sense a shift in, I guess, the professionalism of the club. I think that's partially due to the growth of the game in those years, and I think that's the first step of the growth. That's when I really realised it was moving in the right direction within Germany, and it was growing. The women's game was growing, and that probably hadn't been the case when I left, and probably was also part of the reason why I then left to go to the US.
So it's quite a bit different, and quite in a good way.
Yeah, very much in a good way. Yeah, and that made the club attractive for me to return because I spoke to loads of people, and as I said, partially it felt like home, and I knew they were moving in the right direction, and I wanted to go back and be part of that growth.
Yeah, that's nice to hear. Nice to hear that you, I guess you did contribute to that as well, obviously. Some good success there. I want to move on to sort of your time in England next. Obviously, you spent a couple of years at Reading. You made 25 league appearances in 2 seasons before making the move to Leicester, which was actually technically a step down in the first place, wasn't it? Because it was into the Championship, but only for 1 season. Then back into WSL football, where you've sort of settled, I guess, as Leicester Football Club. How, before we get into sort of more of the sort of what this pod's all about and the stats, how would you describe your playing style?
I think I wear my heart on the sleeve. That's who I am as a person, but also as a player. And I think anyone or everyone that watches me sees that. I take absolute pride in not only consistency within my performances, but especially in defending. And I will do everything to help the team to succeed.
Yeah, I like that you focus on the sort of, rather than the, I guess, the stats and things like the analytics of it, the actual personality behind the way you play.
Yeah.
I've mentioned on the pod a few times that I have this theory that 50% of the game you can work out by either watching or by looking at the numbers. then there's 25% that you won't pick up on if you watch, and there's another 25% where if you just look at the numbers, you'd never work it out.
Yeah.
And you're a player that I always think that you've probably got a bit more than 25% where you can't just look at the numbers, because I think you're such you're a loud person on the pitch, not in a obnoxious
No,
way or
I
anything.
understand what you
You're a
mean.
communicator, you're a leader, you sort of telling your players where they need to be and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
in a good way.
I didn't take that personally at all. I almost think for me that's a compliment.
Yeah, it is. It is a compliment. Looking at some of the numbers, so I'm going to reel off some of the ones from this season in the WSL. So we are, I should know this off the top of my head, I think 15 games in now. You are one of only 10 players that have played every minute in the WSL this season. 5 of those are goalkeepers as well, so you're only one of 5 outfield players that have done that. You've not made an error that's led to a shot. You've not been dispossessed. You've made the most clearances in the league of 110. You've made the second most defensive actions, 153, only behind Ash Neville. And you're also in the top 10 for aerial duels won and long passes completed. So there's quite a good array of stats there. And I think it goes away to show that Leicester are obviously a team that aren't necessarily pressing up into that Champions League level top 3 position at the moment, but outside the top 4 teams, which, there's a bit of a gap between the top 4 and everyone else. Outside of those, Leicester are the team that have conceded the fewest goals this season. And I think when you're reading some of those numbers out, not just the rest of the team, but just the way you play, I think that addresses that quite well to sort of make it not so much of a surprise that Leicester are doing so well defensively because of this kind of work. I don't know how much of those stats you already knew, or if you'd...
Some of them, not all of them. I like looking at them, but I'm definitely not obsessed with stats. As you mentioned, I think stats should be used as a guide and can give you, I guess, a rough idea, but you won't ever see the full picture if you only look at the numbers. But I think the numbers you've mentioned just shows how much we take pride in not conceding as a team, and that's not only the back line. It's something that starts from the very first player, the very highest player, and that's something we really focused on coming into this season. And we are very happy about those stats. Obviously, we are not happy with where we are in the league, and that's something we have to focus on and improve on, the standings within the league. But if you look at those defensive stats isolated, I think that's something we pride ourselves on.
Yeah, I think it's something where you've had to adapt a bit this season, I think it's fair to say, because for those that haven't been following Leicester that closely, you've been hit quite hard by injuries, especially in attacking areas in the pitch. You've had quite a lot of, well, I guess your sort of regular goal scorers, think about Rantala and Peterman, people like that, out with injury, which has meant it's even more important for the defence to step up. So to be the team in the bottom 8 with the fewest goals conceded, I think is quite a good thing to show that you're going in the right direction. There's a question here that we had from Sarah on X, which said, and I'm assuming she's a Leicester fan by the way she's worded this. She says, our team has the best defensive record outside the top 4. What do you mainly attribute this to? And how does the team mentally cope with the onset of injuries we had earlier this season?
I'll try and answer the injury one first. It's tough because those are not only football players and teammates, they're our friends and they're human beings, and they are injured and therefore can't do what they love to do. That is hard to see. As a team and as athletes, we are trained to focus on what we can control, and those injuries happen. So we had to focus on the players we had available, and we had to adapt our playing style, I guess, a little bit, because we had so many attacking players missing. It hurts that we're missing them, but it hurts more to know they are suffering, because as I mentioned, these people are our friends. How do you adapt or adjust? I think it sounds really brutal, but you can't let that get you too down and distract you. You can't change it. So dwelling on that, on all these injuries too much and using that as an excuse is not helpful. We had to come together as a team, and we said we're pretty much missing literally almost every attacking player we have in the squad. So if that means some of our players had to take up a different position, play out of position and do a different job than what they're used to, then that's what it is. But we'll do it together. And of course, we weren't happy about it, and we struggled to score goals. But I think through that spell, we did what we could defensively, and that shows in the stats. And I think with that, I'm answering the second question of we had to deal with the situation we were put in, and we did that by taking pride in defending. And if we could hit them quickly on the counter and go and score, that's what we tried. But we also had to manage expectations, and we were missing at one point, I think, 6 of our attacking players. That's literally 2 front lines that were in the gym rehabbing. Our injury list at one point was larger than our impact player sub list. And that was brutal to see in team meetings. But we also knew we would do everything we were doing on the pitch, we were doing for the injured players. And that gives you that extra motivation, I guess, to run that extra yard to defend that goal.
Yeah, I feel like the bit that you started on that with as well, the fact that it was they're your friends as well. Leicester strikes me as, because I think as a lot of people that listen to this podcast probably do follow quite a lot of the players around the WSL, and a lot of the Leicester players seem to, on social media, do a lot of stuff together, which I think shows that it's not just we have to turn up and it's almost like going to work because we have to spend time with these people and do a job, but you actually have that camaraderie. And then when you get into tough times like this, I think that probably gives teams a bit of an edge when you've got that camaraderie and you've got that friendship to work together and to want to do stuff for each other, whether those people are on the pitch or not.
Yeah, I think with us within our squad right now, we have a large proportion of players that have moved from abroad, and if not moved from abroad, moved from far away within the UK. So what we have at Leicester is our football family, and we absolutely look after one another. The stuff you mentioned on social media, we spend time with one another off the pitch. That's first of all how connections are built and how bonds are made. But a lot of us don't have immediate family around. So we, for one another, are our families here at Leicester. I say here as if I'm in Leicester right now, but down in Leicester. And it's also quite a small place. So it's not like London where you have loads of different teams where you have, I guess, players from the same national team or potential then family. We have Leicester and Leicester only. And as a community, but especially as a club, we pride ourselves on looking after one another. And there's a whole overall image of we're in this together, and that's just how we live at the club and within the city of Leicester.
I like that. That's a very nice way of putting it. I want to move on to your international career next. When I was doing a bit of prep for this, I found out something that I didn't actually know, which was that you went to the Under-20 World Cup in Japan with Germany before you started playing for Scotland.
Yeah, that's true.
Which I guess makes sense, obviously, growing up there.
Yeah, growing up in Germany, I was a bit off the radar for, I think, the Scottish setup. I think also my dad being quite dominant within my football career. Everyone knew I had an English dad, but very few people knew I had a Scottish mum. And I think for a lot of people, it's very difficult to understand how I could represent Scotland at youth level. Represents Germany at youth level, but now have absolute pride and honour representing Scotland at senior level internationally. I think for people that aren't in my situation and haven't, I guess, been and grown up in the situation that I did, it's hard to understand. But for me, for my first 18 years, Germany was my home. And all my friends were German. I went to a normal, even though mum and dad spoke English at home, I went to a normal German school and set up and went through the normal German football setup. And then when Germany invited me to go to those camps and then ended up representing Germany at the under-20s level, I did that with pride. But that doesn't take away what I feel wearing the Scotland skirt. That doesn't take away from what I feel wearing the Scotland shirt today. I absolutely loved my experience in Japan in 2012 when we competed at the Under-20s World Cup. And no one can ever take that away from me. But every time that I step on the pitch wearing the Scotland shirt, it's probably the biggest honour I've ever experienced in my life.
I like that. It's a nice way of putting it as well when you've got, because I mean, not quite at the same level of sports person, unfortunately, but I'm like you, where I've got different nationalities. Yep. Obviously, I've grown up in England, but my mum's side of the family is from Scotland. My dad's side of the family is from Italy. So although I will support England when they're playing in tournaments or anything, I do also support Italy, and I have my Scotland jacket on right now. So I do sort of look out for all three countries. It does make the Six Nations a bit of a pain,
Yeah, I
but
can
other than
imagine.
that, for football or anything else, yeah, it is a lovely thing to have sort of multiple things to look out for and multiple things to take care about. Obviously, you do play for Scotland now. You made your debut in 2017, and I've gone on to make 57 appearances so far, maybe 58 by the time this goes out, because you're obviously I'm hoping in the squad against Netherlands tomorrow. What would you say has been your favourite moment so far in a Scotland shirt?
That's a hard one because usually we always talk about the toughest moments. So it's actually hard to talk about like the good moments. I probably would say it's at the 2019 World Cup in France, the opening game playing against England, and particularly standing, I guess, in the lineup singing the anthem and seeing my whole family in the stands. It almost brought everything together for me, everything that I sacrificed throughout my career and moved away from my family that I'm very, very close with at a very young age, and therefore missed a lot of, I guess, milestones of my family and my siblings in particular. But seeing them all in the stands and sharing that moment with them is probably not only one of the, probably the biggest moment in a Scotland shirt.
Very nice, very wholesome as well. That obviously reaching a major tournament is always the big thing for any international side.
Mm.
Is I'm assuming the World Cup is going to be the next one. Obviously, unfortunately missed out on the Euros this summer, but the World Cup is the next one. I know you're going to say yes in some sort of capacity, but do you think Scotland have got the minerals to get there?
Right now, we've got a lot of work to do, if that is my honest answer. We still have time to build what I know we can build, and we need to trust the process and need to use every opportunity to build. We have no time to waste, and I think we're fully aware that we've still got work to do. But I do really believe with the individuals we have, and especially when we come together collectively on the pitch, we can compete and we can qualify for a major tournament. We've missed out on 3 now, and that's up to us as players, because in the end we didn't make it happen, and it is very painful because what we've created at Scotland in terms of the connections and bond within the team and the squad is very, very special. So to not qualify, knowing that that's everyone's goal, is not only painful for yourself, but again, you see your friends, your teammates suffer. But that's football and that's life. We can't dwell on that, and we can't feel sorry for ourselves, because if we're really honest, it's up to us that it hasn't happened.
You win as a team, you lose as a team. You get through it together as a team, don't you?
Exactly. But I do think a lot of teams have fallen apart after losses and after disappointments, which we haven't and we won't. We just need to realise that it was up to us 3 times now that we didn't qualify. And that sometimes is also hard to admit and hear.
Yeah, I appreciate the honesty in the answer, because it'd be quite easy just to give you standard sort of press conference manager answer. Let's move on a bit more of like a wider scope, talking about the women's game, because I'm intrigued, especially as this podcast, Decoding the WSL, is a lot about analysis and sort of data and that kind of stuff. I'm intrigued how much of a factor that sort of stuff is. So like data and analysis and tracking and things like that. Everyone knows in the men's side how much stuff there is and how much of it is made public and things like that. But how in depth is it in the women's game? Is it used sort of every match? Do you look at these sort of things? Is it purely data? Is there a lot of video stuff? What goes on?
I think there is way more out there than what we see as players. There is obviously platforms and ways you can get a hold of your individual stats. I think that's a very dangerous thing, because stats have to be used in an appropriate way, I think, to benefit what you're trying to figure out and do and improve on. We mainly, as a club, deal with collective stats in terms of looking at the games, what are the areas we want to hit and the objectives and how we hit them. objectively with in terms of stats. I think where it's massively improved is in terms of recruitment. Again, I find that very, very tricky and dangerous because stats only give you, as you mentioned yourself, they can be an absolute incredible tool, but they only give you a certain percentage of the player. So if I'm a manager or someone that's in charge of recruitment, I'm going to watch this player game after game after game in different teams, because in your club team and international, because you potentially play differently. And then I use my stats to support that or to challenge what I've seen. We at the club use a lot of analysis, so that's footage and videos, and that's obviously prepared by our analysis team. So they have all the data and all the footage, and they cut it down to, I guess, provide us with what's not important, but what we can digest in that short period of time, because you can easily overflow or overload in terms of information you provide. I only know a few players that look at their individual stats, but it's used, as I mentioned, in a collective manner. So we do a lot of video. I'm just thinking here on camp as well. It's very similar. You use the footage and then you have stats that the analysis team provide that confirms, I guess, what you've seen or how you felt. When I think back to Hoffenheim times, we didn't have any of that. There was no stats, there was no video analysis. It was all prepare for a game, move on, prepare for a game, move on. So that's where the game's massively improved. I think it's very good that we've got all that available now. It just has to be used in an appropriate manner, I think.
Yeah, I think definitely you can definitely get as an analyst. I can tell you now, you definitely get lost in the stats quite easily. And I'm fortunate I've got access to Y Scout as well, so I get to see videos and things like that. Yeah, really easy to get lost in it. I can definitely see why someone would be overwhelmed by it if you give them too much. Obviously, a lot of it is about performance when you look at the data and stats and stuff. I'm interested to know if there's anything with regards to things like fitness and recovery, because not necessarily just for injuries, but from game to game and load and things like that. Is there anything like that?
We obviously wear the GPS units that track load in terms of overall distance, high speed run, sprint distance, accelerations, decelerations, and those are used in terms of long-term seeing your load. They're used the moment you do get injured, because everyone gets injured at some point, to use that and where do I want to get back to. In terms of recovery, it's a difficult one. There's questionnaires that are filled in, whether that's at club or country, to get a feeling, but that's very subjective, isn't that? Personally, I use a fitness track. I don't even know if I'm allowed legally to drop the name, but that helps me with my sleep and recovery, and that I use individually because I'm quite interested and almost obsessed with getting, I guess, that 1% out of me in terms of recovery. The interesting thing about the recovery part is, like, there's so many new things out there in terms of recovery pumps, and game ready is a physio thing, but other different machines and this and foam rolling and that, and everyone talks about all these different things. I'm telling you, if you sleep properly and you follow a good diet, that's most of it covered. I think your mental freshness and well-being plays a massive part as well, because I know if I'm mentally fresh, physically I can get through anything. So I think there's all these little things that everyone's talking about, but I think if we focused on the sleep, nutrition, and the mental well-being, you could have everything covered. And I think that's something clubs and countries should focus on more. And individually, I think athletes should, but there's maybe a lack of knowledge or lack of emphasis on that's actually going to help you. But I could talk about that hours, because it just baffles. I'm really interested in it myself, but it just baffles me how we're going away from the actual key factors that will make you recovered and therefore be able to train again the next day. And we're focusing on all these little percentages, but if you don't get the foundation right, like, you don't even worry or need to worry about the little percent.
I think foundation is exactly the right word to use, because I mean, even just as an amateur myself, you see so much and you get so much marketed towards you about different things you should be doing for your fitness and your recovery and things, supplements you should have. And vitamins, and this is how much water you should be drinking, and this is when you should be doing that, and this is when you should be doing this. And you do all of that and you think about all these things, and then you slip up on the basic stuff like, did you actually get enough sleep, and
Yeah.
did you actually hydrate yourself properly, and are you actually mentally in a good place, and are
Yeah.
you balancing your work and play and
Yeah.
things like that. I wanted to ask you as well about in terms of how the game's changing, not just the data side of it, but I guess the WSL and how you feel around it, because just from me watching over the last few years, especially in the years since you've joined, I think the quality of football generally has increased.
Yeah.
Throughout the WSL, I think from the best teams have got better, and the teams lower down the table have also got better. Everyone's increasing their quality. As a defender, how has it changed? Is it a bit more tactical than it used to be? Are the attackers any sort of stronger or quicker than they used to be? Do you attack more, any less than you used to? What sort of things have changed for you?
I think the game has gotten so much quicker from when back in the days when I started, or even when I've moved to England in those 7 years now. Which means you have less time to make decisions, whether that's on the ball or without the ball. Because as a defender, or often when people talk about decision making, we often think about players on the ball. But if I'm a defender and I'm defending, I'm not on the ball. I've got not even a fraction of a second to decide whether I jump that player or I don't. And if I have less time, but if I make that decision too late, I could then make the wrong decision. I could jump and they play past me. So I think that's changed, that you have less time to make decisions, and the consequences of making those decisions late or wrong are bigger, because now the quality, I think, of players and the game has increased so much that you get punished for a little mistake, and that can be a positional mistake, that can be decision making, that obviously can also be technical errors and whatnot. I think the 1v1 duels, and I say duels on purpose because it's attacking and defending, is something that has gotten so much better and actually harder to be successful in within the game, that is one of the biggest things I would look at. The amount of times you find yourself in a 1v1 because it goes so quick, and players are now so good that you have to actually be able to dominate that to be successful in no matter what position, but especially I think as a defender. The players are just getting, and I'm now talking about attacking players, they're just getting so much better with each year, but also the deliveries for those players are getting so much better. So they find themselves in 1v1 duels so much that you have to be able to dominate them, because otherwise you're going to have a tough time on the pitch, I think. I think one thing that, it doesn't bother me, but one thing I always think about is when people talk about defenders now, they always talk about this more modern ball playing centre back. And I agree with that. We, as a group of centre backs, all have progressed massively in terms of that. And absolutely, you have to be able to dominate the ball. You have to be a ball playing centre back. But what my fear is actually is that we're losing defenders that can defend. As I mentioned very early on in the episode, is I take absolute pride in defending, but that's just who I am as a person. I see that as my job for my teammates. Do I want to be my best on the ball? Absolutely, and that's what I work on every single time or every single day in training. But we are losing defenders that can defend because we focus so much on these ball playing players in the modern game. But my job as a defender is to defend, and I need to be able to do that primarily. I don't want to take away from the on-ball skills that everyone has. And I think as a group of centre-backs, we all have some more than others, but that's also normal in player profiling. But I just wish we actually focus on the defensive work defenders do.
I think you can tell it's an area that, I mean, just looking at your stats that I reeled off earlier, you can tell it's an area that you definitely prioritise, because you've, like I said, you've had the most clearances, you've had the second most defensive actions, but being on the ball is also important. You know, you've had the most long passes, for example, in the top 10 in the WSL this year. Another bit that I didn't actually mention, but I did write down the notes, was I looked at your numbers in the last 365 days, comparing the top 9 leagues in the world. Which is, if anyone's used FBref, you'll have seen these before. And yeah, you can see that the defending for you, and I'm assuming just from watching Leicester play, I haven't looked at others like, you know, Julie and things like that. But I'd imagine they've got similar numbers where you've got really high numbers for the number of touches you have in your own box, but you've also got really high numbers for clearances per 90, interceptions, and aerial duels won. So that just says, I guess, like you were saying earlier, the stats tell a story, and you can tell it from the way you play as well, that defending is the number one job. And if I'm defending, I'm doing something right. If I can also, play some good long passes and help set my teammates up, fantastic. But defending is the job. And that's probably a large part of the reason that Leicester are doing so well defensively this season as well, that both yourself and the rest of the team have got that attitude.
Yeah, I don't want to take away from the whole on-ball stuff, because I think I always think about the players in front of me. For them to create good chances, I need to get them in good positions, and I actually need to play them balls that they can deal with. So if I'm just launching the ball forward, I'm not getting them in good positions. I need, as a defender, make sure I travel up with the ball, whether that's circulation, whether that's me stepping in, to then get the players ahead of me in a good position to actually be able to create a good chance. So I take responsibility for that as well. But I just think, like, in the modern game, we're forgetting a bit about the defending. And I think for me, like, every time I step on that pitch, I enjoy being a nightmare for attackers. I actually get a thrill out of them getting annoyed. I sometimes want to, like, make them feel or have this false sense of security that they can turn and they can, and then I hit them. And it sounds really weird, but I love that feeling of annoying them and seeing that disappointment on their face. And it is a bit of a weird thing, but yeah, that brings me a lot of joy. And often when I walk on the pitch, and people have mentioned it a lot, that I talk to myself when I walk on that pitch, and I tell myself that today I'm going to be their biggest nightmare.
I think you've got to be, haven't you? If you're not their biggest nightmare, if you're their friend on the pitch, they're probably going to take advantage of you. You've got to be a proper pain, especially, I guess, as a centre-back when you're marking sort of forwards that, like you've said, have got quicker and think quicker and have better delivery and things like that. You've got to be a pain. Let's move to some of the more, off the pitch stuff, because I had a couple of areas that I wanted to talk to you about. One is an area that you've already alluded to a little bit, which is the podcast you've got yourself, the Bold Tackle, yourself and your brother Oliver. Jules actually on X asked, this was unprompted, but she did ask, are you going to be doing more episodes of the Bold Tackle?
We will. That is the short answer. We did take a little break to, I guess, both take care of our personal lives. We have recorded episodes. It's just about waiting to have a group of episodes for us to bring them out again. But yes, we are recording currently, and we will be bringing episodes out. Just be patient with us.
They're on their way, because you did some, obviously, you and your brother do it most of the time, but you did some with your teammates as well, didn't you?
Yeah, that usually happens twice. My brother had the man flu. Whether that exists, I don't actually know. Apparently it does. Apparently scientifically there is such thing as a man flu. But my brother, he's got a normal job as well. The podcast we do voluntarily in that sense. It's for us to provide an insight for people that want that insight. So he's got a normal job as well, and he's got a family and a little daughter. So you can't always make it happen, and that's when I've got really good friends that jump in and help out. Especially when we were traveling in Australia, and it was really difficult to figure out with the time difference. And the feedback for those episodes when my friends joined me were really good. So I might actually reach out to them again and ask them to help out.
Yeah, they were good. I think I mentioned to you before, I've been listening to the Bold Tackle since probably about this time last year when I found it. So yeah, obviously listened to a lot of the ones of you and your brother, but yeah, also the ones that you had Eugene Leitzig on and Lena Peterman.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were good. The other thing I wanted to speak to you about off the pitch was your coaching licenses, because you've already mentioned about not just trying to progress as a player, but trying to progress as a person, whether that's a variety of different things. But obviously coaching licenses is another one. You've done your UEFA B, I believe, and are doing your UEFA A. Linda on X did ask, how is the course going for your senior pro license?
It's going really well. As you mentioned, I'm currently doing the Senior Pro A license, actually through the FA, the English FA, and it's going really well. We're more than halfway underway. It's very challenging time-wise at times, and I actually didn't know that I'd enjoy it this much. Yeah, I can't say we're almost done because there's still a lot of work to be done. but we're well underway. And I say we because I do it together with Sam Tierney at the club. But hopefully by the end of the season, if all goes well, I should have my A licence.
Fantastic. So is that sort of the, when the day comes that you do have to hang your boots up, is that the plan to move into coaching, or
Potentially.
is the door open?
Potentially. That's not the only thing I've got my eyes set on, but it definitely, first of all, opens doors, and it's something I'm very passionate about. So for those two reasons, I started my coaching journey. But it's definitely something I can see myself doing.
Yeah, there's no harm having the sort of opportunity for it. I know, just off the top of my head, I'm thinking Anitra Asante is a good example. She obviously has been doing coaching at Bristol and does it for England and youth setups and things like that, but also does loads of media stuff and things. It's not like you have to be pigeonholed into one. But yeah, you're obviously doing the coaching stuff, but you're obviously good at the media stuff as well with the podcast. And I know I'm not the first podcast you've guested on as well. You're comfortable doing that kind of stuff as well.
Yeah, I think I've gotten comfortable through being uncomfortable at the beginning. When my brother and I started the podcast, he's a bit more media trained in the sense of he does that for work partially as well. So that's why he's so good at what he does with it, like at work, but within our podcast as well. But I've learned to just enjoy it. And as you mentioned, this is not the first podcast I've been on by my own. And in the end, it's just sharing my insights, I guess, that I've experienced throughout the years. I don't get nervous anymore because in my eyes, there's no, as long as I'm respectful at all times, there's no right and wrong,
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, it's also something I enjoy, and probably I'm looking to develop myself further.
Yeah, and I think people like me, and obviously everyone that listens along or watches along, depending on what it is, appreciates it because I've never been, and as most people aren't, good enough to be a professional footballer and to sort of experience the full extent of it. So to hear the insights of people that are at that level and to sort of bring us closer to it is always really appreciated. I think that's why there's so much content out there, because it gets watched and it gets listened to because people love it. I do have a couple more questions from that people have written in with. This one is actually from the last guest that I had on the pod, Izzy from the Fantasy WSL team, who asked, how do you feel about your Fantasy WSL score? So this season you have 47 points so far. I can tell you're the top scoring Leicester player. You're joint with Yanis Cayman. You're the 14th best defender in the league and the second best defender outside the top four teams. Only Nuke Denton at West Ham has got more points than you. Is that a score you're happy with?
I think probably considering how or where we stand within the league, yes, I guess. But I'm going to look to add further points so everyone can put me in their fantasy teams.
Izzy did also mention to me, she sent me an email about 2 hours ago, because we were looking at how many people have been transferred in and out this week, and you are in the top 20 this week.
Oh, nice. Is that transferred in or out?
Transferred in.
Oh, that's good. Good, we'll take that.
So, yeah, obviously people are seeing the good work you've been doing, and I think you've got a few more points up your sleeve.
Nice.
I've got one more question, which is as in like a longer one, which is from Charlie on Instagram, who is a Leicester fan and asks, our home form has been pretty good this season. Obviously, the last 3 games being the draw with Chelsea and then 2 big wins. We've got 10 points at home so far this season and only got 8 last season. It feels like we're making the King Power quite difficult to come and play at. Does the team feel this too, and why do you think this is?
We've had discussions about this as a team, and I'm very confident that I can share this. And King Power is our home, and we will defend the King Power with everything we have. And we want to make it very difficult for any opposition to come to the King Power. And I think we've shown that this season. I think previous seasons, at times we were still too far off to make that happen. But especially this season, we know we can be quite ugly and we can make it really difficult for teams to come and play us. And we absolutely love our fan base. When I spoke about the community and the club and the identity of Leicester as a whole, that includes a fan base. There's a real sense of togetherness and belonging. And the fans have stuck with us through very difficult seasons and years. So we see as our duty to give back, and the way we can give back is you can't always dictate a result, but you can make sure you put on a good performance. And even if that fails, what you can do is fight, and that's what we will do until the very last minute. And we see it as our responsibility to do that for the people, I guess, that are stuck with us for all this time.
Yeah, that's really nice. I really like that answer. I've been to the King Power once this season. I took my fiance actually for her first match at Leicester, because we live about an hour away. Went to see the Liverpool game.
Yeah.
Where obviously went 1-0 down, but came back to win. And yeah, you could see that fight within the team, that it is your home and you're going to make a point that you're not just going to brush aside.
Yeah.
You could see from some of the body language of the Liverpool players, that they weren't enjoying playing against you, I think is the best way of wording that. You were being their nightmare, not you specifically, but the team as a whole. Right, the last little bit is something that's going to be a staple on Decoding the Pros, which is some quick fire questions. And some of them are from me, some of them are written in from the fans. So, first one, would you rather score an overhead kick or score from 30 yards?
Overhead kick.
What's your favourite kit that you've ever played in?
Oof. Well, that's difficult. I think the light blue Scotland away top.
It's a good shout, that one. What gives you the biggest adrenaline rush in football?
A crunching tackle. That I absolutely love that. The sound of a tackle when it's a clean tackle, but you know you've hit that ball really well. And then, yeah, I think it's the reaction of the crowd as well. Because if you hit it cleanly, it doesn't hurt. It doesn't hurt yourself, but it doesn't hurt any player. You'd never want to hurt a player. Sometimes the job is a tackle, but that I guess reaction from that tackle gives me a lot of push.
Lovely, I like that. Would you? Well, this might kind of go into the next one. Would you rather get a red card or score an own goal? Obviously, neither. But
yeah, it probably also depends a bit on the minute and whatnot.
Let's say 10 minutes in, it's 0-0.
Oof. 10 minutes in, own goal. 10 minutes in, own goal, because we can go and score again.
Who's the best player that you've ever played with?
Played with Kim Little, back in the day.
Who is the most famous contact in your phone?
I don't think I have famous people in mine.
You must have at least most of the Scotland team in there.
Yeah, I'd probably say Caswell or Erin Cuthbert.
Who is going to be Scotland's best player in 4 years' time?
In 4 years' time? It'll still be Caswell, I think. Karen. He's still got a fair few years left in her.
Yeah, she's actually surprised, given the amount of experience she's got at quite a high level. She's not that old, is she?
No, she's still very young. Yeah.
Okay, final question for the pod. Would you rather win the FA Cup with Leicester or get to a World Cup semi-final with Scotland?
Ooh. Win the FA Cup with Leicester. Don't get much for getting to a semi-final, do you? Not like we've won the World Cup. So I'd say win the FA Cup.
Good answer. Well, thank you very much, Sophie, for coming on. I really appreciate you giving your time. Quite a busy time for you at the moment.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. No problem at all. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I could give you answers that you can work with, I guess.
Oh yeah, definitely. It'll be an easy edit. Don't worry. And good luck for tomorrow against the Netherlands.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll need it, but we're ready to put in a shift.
Good to hear. Thank you to Sophie for joining me for that episode, and thank you, listener, for tuning in to Decoding the WSL and to Decoding the Pros. If you've enjoyed today's episode, do make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It does help if you can give us a 5-star review. Goes a long way in helping others find the show, and give us a bit of feedback as well. Obviously, this is the first time we've done a show like this, so get in touch with me through any social media or email decodingthewslpod@gmail.com. And just let us know what you think. You can follow at Decoding the WSL on Instagram for even more stats and insights. Of course, you can follow me at Statorino on X, Blue Sky, Instagram, and now putting out some content on TikTok as well. But yeah, thank you again for listening, and I will speak to you at the next one.